Thank you everyone for joining us. We're recording this session again. It will be available later on YouTube. Keep a very friendly and nice environment for everyone here, since we're all coming to learn, and engage as much as you can here on the chat. All right, this is Hussam, and I'm gonna step back here and give the mic to Ben to start today's session.
Thank you very much, Hussam. If you've had the opportunity to attend any of the previous sessions we've done in the last few weeks, I'm going to repeat something that I've been saying consistently to start off with, and that is basically I encourage participation. I've done these sessions enough times to realize that if there's engagement and there's questions and even comments, it makes these sessions more impactful and more useful. So I would encourage you to use the chat feature. I'll be keeping an eye on that as we go through this. If you say something and we don't see it, please be persistent, post it again, and I'll do my best to get back to it. So I'm going to share my screen, and if I can just get a quick confirmation from somebody that you can see my screen and also that you can hear me loud and clear. Okay, great, thank you. So as was introduced, the topic today is an interesting topic, and even before I get started, I'm going to say thank you to the kind comments that are being placed in the chat window. The topic for today's session is very interesting to me, and it's interesting for a few different reasons. One of the things that I'm going to tell you right off the bat that hopefully will come into more focus as we go through this session is, first of all, I don't think that there's anything that I'm going to be sharing with you today that will be particularly groundbreaking. I truly feel like most of the concepts that I'm going to share today are concepts that you probably have thought about yourself to some degree or another. And I'm not saying that to you because I'm trying to diminish the message that I'm going to share with you today. I'm saying that because I really want to challenge you that as we go through the next 55 minutes and I share some of these concepts that you've probably thought about before, I really want to challenge you to take that to the next level. Really focus on analyzing your own personal work habits, analyze those habits on where they are today and where they could be or should be tomorrow, especially since the whole topic of this presentation is around creating impact and presence in the virtual world. Wherever you fall on the idea of whether it's good or better or worse to work from the office or work from home, what's interesting is that, of course, about a year ago, we all had this pandemic that was kind of just out of the blue, and just in large, massive scale, most of us found ourselves working remotely. And so I'm going to assume that if you've decided to attend today's session, you are working remotely, at least part of the time, and that you're here because you would like some insight or some information on how to create an impact and establish your presence in this new virtual world that we're all living in. So I'm going to start by just talking very quickly about some interesting concepts around the pros and the cons of working remotely. And what's really interesting to me, there's been a ton of research that's been done on this, but I'm going to ask you now, based on that research, I'm going to see how close or accurate you are. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is you are much more productive working from home, and 10 is you're much more productive working from the office, where do you think the research indicates the reality is on that scale of 1 to 10? Go ahead and use your chat window to type in a number. Okay, again, I'm seeing kind of middle of the road, lots of 4s, lots of 5s, lots of 6s, a couple 2s, a couple 3s. Well, so I don't know, honestly, if those that decided to attend the session today are much more astute or much more aware of this topic, because normally I will get a lot wider of a range of responses, and that's awesome. I think it's great, because the answer is kind of a trick question, because like I said, there's been so much research done on this, and there's so many different positions and opinions on this that people that like to work from home will point to research studies that say working from home is more productive, and people that like to work from the office like to point to research studies that say that working from the office is more productive. And the reality is there's so many studies out there that say both. So I'm not going to attempt right now to tell you which one is better or which one is worse. I want you to think about this for a minute. You can see on your screen here, there's a list of pros, and this is just a small list. If I put the full list up here, there'd probably be 20 or 30 more bullet points, but there is a strong list of pros for being able to work remotely and work from a home office. And honestly, just focusing on just the financial aspect of it is interesting, because studies show that businesses will save about $22,000 per employee per year when they allow their employee to work remotely, and the employee themselves save about $8,000 per year by being able to work remotely. So these are some of the pros. Of course, with the pros come the cons, and the cons, I would have to admit that the cons are going to be where we spend most of the rest of the time focusing on today, because it's these cons that come into play that diminish your impact and diminish your presence and have a direct correlation to your job satisfaction and job performance and so on and so forth. So we are going to spend more of our time today talking about the cons. So I do want to just offer one more. I've seen some comments in the chat window asking for the study link. I have included links to multiple studies. These links are available and will be posted when we post the recording. But I'm going to tell you right now, there's like 6 or 7 links that I've included in the slides that you're looking at. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you do a simple search and try, to do your own research on this, you are going to find just tens upon tens, or even to the hundreds of studies that have been done on this topic, and there's such a wide range of results that my intent today is not to establish one as being better than the other. And of course, the slide that I'm showing right now is in reference to that point I just made, because really it depends. And if I go back to the question that I asked just a few minutes ago, so many of you were saying if you had the choice to work remotely or from the office, you would prefer a mixture. And so my response here is to say it really depends. Which one is better or not really kind of depends on the situation. And I'm not going to attempt to tell you which one is better, but I am going to tell you for the rest of the time we have here some very specific things that you can do that will both hurt and help your career and hurt and help your performance evaluations and job satisfaction, given how you operate in this remote environment. And again, there's more links to more studies that I've included on the slides. So what we're going to spend the rest of the time today talking about are some strategies. We're going to talk about some of the workspace strategies, visibility strategies. We're going to talk about productivity strategies, and we're also going to talk about management strategies. So one of the very first workplace strategies that I want to focus on has to do with the workspace that you have. Now, if you think about it for a moment, when you were working from the office, you had a workspace. It might have been a cubicle, it might have been an office, it might have been just a desk. But the point is you had a workspace, and that workspace typically in the office was set up to give you the opportunity to focus and be productive and avoid interruptions. And there were some very specific functions of that office space. And now that you're working remotely, the importance of those functions of that space doesn't diminish. And so this is kind of going back to the point I made a minute ago, where some of this might not seem like really groundbreaking information, but I really challenge you to think about this for a moment. Think about your space. Think about the workspace that you have set aside for yourself at your home or your remote location, and how it is set up to establish this really rich, beneficial environment. On the screen that you're looking at that I'm sharing with you right now, I say intentionally that it is critical that you create this environment at your remote location that mimics the environment that you had when you were in the office, that gives you the ability to focus and to be effective without interruptions. And you have to set up rules for others that are in that workspace, whether it's your pets or your children or your friends. It's really important to do that. So I would say, and so basically what you see on your screen right now, there's some suggestions on how to do that. And then this is one of those points that I'm going to make that we talked about briefly a few minutes ago when we were talking about a mixture of both. If you have something that is incredibly important, I would suggest that you might want to come into the office for that, just because of the environment is more conducive to avoiding interruptions or avoiding, power outages or whatever it might be. So the second workspace strategy that I'm going to share with you is very similar to the first. In addition to setting up rules for others, you need to set up rules for yourself. And this one's a little bit interesting because, there's a lot of those pros that you saw a minute ago, which are really nice pros. I mean, you can go to work in your pajamas, and sometimes you could even go to work and still stay in bed. There are all sorts of things that you can do on that pros list, but I want you to stop for a moment and think about this, because just like you had a strategy and a schedule and a process when you were working from the office, there should be a similar strategy and process that you're now working remotely. And that doesn't mean that you have to every single day, get up at 8 o'clock, take a shower, get your business dress on and everything and be ready to sit in front of your video camera every day. No, I mean, there's compromises, but today we're talking about creating impact and presence in the virtual world. And I just want you to consider for a moment the impact that you potentially can have on yourself as you retreat into this isolation bubble. Your presence and your impact, the more and more you retreat into this isolation bubble, and the more that you take advantage of some of those pros, you potentially start doing yourself some real harm when it comes to that impact and presence. So when I talk about workspace strategy number 2, I'm talking about showing up for work. Create a schedule, adhere to that schedule, and create this work area that's organized and efficient. So in follow up to that, I'm going to now transition away from the workspace strategies, and I'm going to spend some time now talking about what's called visibility and communication strategies. And this is where most of the conversation in this session is going to land, because communication is so incredibly key. And if you think about it, when you're in the office and you're working face to face, you're constantly interacting with your peers, you're walking past them in the hallway, you're going to lunch with them, you're seeing them in the break room. And now that you are no longer in that environment, that communication just starts to evaporate. It just goes away. And you, like I mentioned just a minute ago, you start getting in this isolation bubble. And so you have to really intentionally make an effort to communicate. So the strategy number 1 that I'm referring to is to speak up and intentionally and deliberately over communicate. Some of the interesting statistics that I can share with you on this subject have to do with organizations with connected employees show productivity increases of 20 to 25%. 97% of workers believe that communication impacts tasks every day. 28% of employees cite poor communication as the reason for not being able to deliver work on time. And then finally, another financial data point which talks about miscommunication costing companies with 100 employees or more an average of $420,000 per year. So when I'm talking about this communication strategy number 1 on how to implement, you're going to hear me say this almost for every one of these communication strategies, and that is, to the best of your ability, try to mimic that communication that existed when you were face to face. Don't be afraid to reach out. Be intentional. You can even set a goal. And I know that this might sound a little maybe overboard, but that's why I'm asking you at the beginning of the session to really challenge yourself to think about this. Challenge yourself to think about what your current impact and presence is now versus when you were working in the office face to face. And so when I say set up an intentional goal of reaching out to your peers or your boss throughout the day, That might sound strange, but I am 100% serious as to the positive impact that it can have. It doesn't have to be a long conversation. It doesn't have to be a 20-minute meeting. It can be a very simple touch point where you're reaching out and forcing those conversations and forcing those communications with your peers and with your boss and even with your customers or whoever it might be, like they used to occur when you were in the office. So, communication strategy number 2. And by the way, there is a lot of information available which is identified as your visibility strategy. A simple search on this can also kind of highlight a lot of what's referred to as visibility strategy. So I'm calling it both visibility and communication, but so much of this is about visibility as well. So again, strategy number 2, ask questions, and you're going to see some overlap here from one to the next, but I want to illustrate this point with a quick story. So a number of years ago, I had been invited to participate on a committee that was in charge of planning an offsite for our organization. So we had about 500 global employees that we were going to bring all together for 1 week to the one central location to have an offsite. And if you can imagine, 500 global employees, to bring them all together for 1 week is a huge financial cost. So I had been put on this committee. There was about 8 of us. One of the individuals on that committee was the senior executive assistant, had been a senior executive assistant for a long time. And as we met together for the very first time, for the very first meeting to plan that offsite, whether it was intentional or not, so much of our conversation basically turned to where we were going to have the offsite. There were employees scattered all over the globe, and the offsite was occurring in the month of March, so we were just finishing kind of the winter months for most of those 500 employees. And the conversation quickly turned to a consensus that wherever we met, we all wanted to meet somewhere where it was warm. You know, it might be Florida, it might be Arizona, it might be Southern California, but wherever we met, it needed to be warm. And so the one member of the committee who I was referring to, who was a senior executive assistant, was taking notes furiously as we were having that first meeting conversation. And I don't even remember what we talked about for the rest of that meeting, but we wrapped it up. And the next meeting, the second meeting that we had, was being attended by the actual senior executive VP, because they wanted to join the committee, kind of give some of their thoughts and some of their direction for this offsite. But before, and as we met for the second time, and before we handed it over to the senior executive, the member of the committee who had been an assistant to the executive was very, very excited to make an announcement before the time was turned over to the executive VP. And that announcement that they were so excited to make was they had been doing some research since we had met the week before, and they had found a fantastic offer for a resort in Phoenix, Arizona. And it was such an incredible discount that they went ahead and they booked the resort. They booked almost 500 rooms. They booked the conference rooms. They booked meals. They booked all of this all of this infrastructure for our offsite, and they put a non-refundable down payment on it. And that non-refundable down payment, if I remember correctly, because this kind of ended up, you'll see why in a moment, was almost ended up kind of being a big deal, was almost a $50,000 down payment. So after they shared this wonderful news about having identified and secured this venue and putting the down payment on it, they turned the time over to the senior executive to share their thoughts. And you could see the senior executive pause for a moment because they weren't really sure how to say it, but they eventually just said it. They said, look, from a financial standpoint, one of the directions that I needed to bring to you today was that we need to consolidate the location of this offsite in one of 3 locations. It needs to either be in Seattle, in Fargo, or Charlotte. And the reason is because there are so many of our employees that live in those 3 locations that by having it in one of those 3 locations, we will avoid a ton of travel costs. And so you can see this assistant who had just made this fantastic announcement about securing the location in Phoenix basically just turned white and was very embarrassed. And it turned into kind of a big deal. And so back to this point, back to this strategy, this communication strategy around asking questions. What happens when you sink into this isolation bubble, this slower communication bubble, is that you stop reaching out and asking questions. Now, this person in the face-to-face work environment would never have done that. They would never have just gone and made the decision to identify the location and put the down payment on it. They would have stood up, they would have walked across the hall to their boss's office, they would have done a number of different things. But this isolation bubble that's created, it is real. So strategy number 2, do not be afraid to ask questions. Mimic the behavior that you would have in a regular work face-to-face environment. And I talked about establishing touch points with your peers. This one's even more important, where you establish a touch point with your boss. Now, I'm going to assume that a lot of you already have weekly touch points with your boss, but if not, make sure you do at least once a week, and sometimes more than once a week. And the concept here is just ask. You just have to reach out and ask those questions that you would normally have asked in a face-to-face environment. Now, part 3 of this strategy is basically using your voice. So as we retreat further and further into this isolation bubble, we start using tools like email and voicemail even, but mostly email, more and more and more to conduct our work. And you know, it's really, if I take you back to this concept of impact and presence, your ability to create that impact and presence is much more heightened when you're having those conversations face to face, and when it's a voice conversation. There was a comment that was made in this chat window just about 20 minutes ago around how so much is lost when you're not speaking face to face, and that's so incredibly true. And so get out of that habit of just using email after email after email. Pick up the phone, pick up a video conference, and communicate with people in the mode where you can hear the inflections in their voice. And then especially if the point that you need to make is important. If your message is important, don't use email. Just don't. I mean, okay, so here's part 2 of the story. I was starting to tell you part 1 of the story at the beginning about going to this offsite, where the number 1 decision that we were needing to make at that offsite was to decide if we were going to let our employees continue, or if we were going to force our employees to continue working face-to-face, or if we were going to let them start working from home. And so I'm sitting in a conference room with a number of my peers that we each own these geographies across the United States. And after almost a full like 4 hours, a half a day of conversation as a team, we finally came to the decision that we were going to compromise. We were going to allow our employees to work from home on Mondays and Fridays, and we were going to maintain core business hours in the office on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And I can remember this being such a groundbreaking decision because we were getting such grief as a management team for so long about this. I was so excited to tell my team about this because I knew how happy they would be. But I also knew in my mind, and you remember I told you how I'm old school, I had a lot of concerns with how this kind of new freedom would be embraced. And so in my mind, I wanted to set up a meeting for the day that I got back into the office, and I wanted to sit down with my team face to face and tell them this great news, and along with the great news, some of the requirements and things that they should be aware of. And as I was on the plane home to Seattle, I had a peer that worked with me in the same office in Seattle who had their own team, and as they were on the plane, on the way home, they became so excited about sending this message to their team, they decided I couldn't wait, and they sent an email. And it would have been okay, I guess, to an extent if they would have only sent that to their team, but they went ahead and sent that same email to my team as well. And it was, congratulations, great, fantastic news. We just wrapped up our meetings, and I'm so excited to tell you that we have a new policy. And all of my, well, not all, but most of my concerns were then realized over the next few weeks as this newfound freedom kind of was embraced with a little bit different approach than I had wanted. And I can tell you, it's funny because of all the experiences I have, that was one where I was very upset. I was very, very upset because that was such an important message. I really wanted to share it face to face. And so mimic the office environment behavior. If it's an important message, deliver it voice to voice. You get up, historically you'd get up and walk into somebody's cube or somebody's office and tell them face to face. Don't change that behavior just because you're now retreating into that isolation bubble. Communication strategy, visibility strategy number 4 is around being involved and volunteering. So this one's interesting, and I want to kind of just make a couple really important points on this. So, you know, again, you can see the overlap, you can hear the themes coming through this, but what happens when we work remotely is that we really start to run the risk of creating a toxic work environment. And there's a lot of studies that have been done on this as well. There's a couple links to those studies and articles that you can look at if you're interested. But the reason that the toxicity is introduced into the environment is because when you can't see your peer visually, you start to wonder if they're really working as hard as you are. When they came into the office every day and sat there at their desk all day long and you saw them and they saw you, you knew how hard they were working. You knew what they were doing. But now that you don't see that and you have diminished communication and they're not picking up the phone, or they're not, you know, they're just sending the occasional email, that starts to potentially create a real toxic work environment. I'm seeing a comment in the chat window that says it could be a good idea to have a persistent video call with the team to mimic the office environment. And I agree completely. If you're, in just a minute, I'm going to share with you a couple quick manager strategies, and that is definitely a strong management strategy. So going back to this concept about, you know, your visibility strategy, about volunteering and being involved, that is just one last comment that I'm going to make relative to that story that I told you. It's a little bit backtracking from the story that I told you. And that is, I saw firsthand, absolutely saw firsthand how this played out. And the reason that I saw it firsthand is because I had been working with and managing my team face-to-face, Monday through Friday, core business hours for at least 3 or 4 years. And so, as a manager, what would happen is that once a year we'd have a performance review, and we would walk into a conference room with all of my manager peers once a year, and I would have an opportunity to present all of the people that reported to me and basically tell my peers and my boss how their year went and what their raise should be and if they should get a promotion and what their bonus should be. And then as I sat in that conference room, my management and my boss peers, they would have a chance to offer their perspective and see if they agreed with my assessment. And so that whole process, although there's always potential problems with the process in general, when we switched to a remote environment, even though it was just initially Monday through Friday, the very first thing that happened is I went into that performance review, and I had my team all lined up, all ready to go with their rewards set that I thought they deserved. And I had this one individual on my team that was by far the strongest contributor. They outsold their peers, they had the highest customer satisfaction, and they were just really on a strong track. And I sat there in the office with all of my management peers and my boss, and I told this really eloquent, really powerful story about the most productive person on my team and how they deserved the biggest bonus and the biggest raise and the biggest recognition. And as I finished up my comments, my peer said, you know, that's interesting, Ben, because I've actually been in the organization this year the same amount of time that individual has been in the organization, and I have not heard them say one word. I have never heard them speak. I have never seen them on a video call. I don't know who they are. How can you tell me that they were the most effective and powerful employee, not just on your team, but in the organization? And so much of that came right back down to these communication points that I'm telling you, because it wasn't that they weren't all those things, it's just because my peer didn't see it. Because that individual had retreated into that isolation bubble, they weren't making an impact visibly, they weren't having a presence visibly, they didn't have a visibility strategy, and it really had an impact. And so I witnessed that firsthand, and I can tell you how powerful it is to be visible and to volunteer and to make sure people see you and hear you and know that you're there. So Looking at another comment in the chat window that says, as a software developer, I need frequent contact with my immediate team, but not every ping from casual conversation in the company. I regularly have to turn down almost all the Slack notifications. So that's interesting, and it's a really valid point, and I'm going to defer commenting on that for just another couple of minutes, because I do have a point that might initially sound like it's in contrast to what you're saying, but it really isn't. So bear with me just for another couple of minutes. I have one more visibility communication strategy that I want to share, and that is utilize video. And I know I've already said this, but this is a core strategy. That doesn't mean that you can't occasionally attend a meeting in your pajamas and not use your video. That doesn't mean that you can't occasionally bend the rules a little bit, but if you really want to be consistent around impact and presence, you need to use your video. And I don't mean to overstate it, but use your video camera, use your video camera, use your video camera. Even if it's just for a portion of the meeting. Let's say that you've got a weekly meeting, and even if it's just for a portion, 5-10 minutes of that meeting, using your video camera is incredibly important and powerful when it comes to impact and presence. And then of course, it's also very, very important to invest in technology, you know, Wi-Fi, a good camera, a good microphone, to make sure that you're not hurting your image and your presence because people can't hear you or see you clearly. All right, let's go ahead and move us along here. I'm going to shift from the visibility and communication strategies to a couple productivity strategies that I want to share with you. Now, you have all heard the concept of work-life balance before. I know that that's something that you're familiar with, but I do have a question for you, and I'm going to ask you to use the chat window one more time. This question is a little bit interesting in how it's phrased, but I'm looking in the chat window for a true or false from you. Is this statement true or false? Employees that work remotely have more tendency to let their home life bleed into their work life as opposed to letting their work life bleed into their home life. Is that statement true or false? And as you're thinking about that, I'm going to say it one more time. Employees that work remotely have more tendency to let their home life bleed into their work life as opposed to letting their work life bleed into their home life. Okay, so I'm looking at the answers in the chat window. I'm seeing most falses. I see a couple trues. I see a depends. All right, well, here's the deal. This is actually a false statement. Now, of course, the pendulum can swing both ways, but the more common problem that remote employees have run into, that research shows that they've run into, is that when you work from home, you don't unplug. You're always on. And when your workday ends at 5 o'clock, your office is still just right there. And so the more common occurrence is for your work life to bleed into your home life. And so when I talk about a productivity strategy here being work-life balance, again, it's not a concept that's new. I know you've all heard of that before, but be aware of that. And especially in this remote environment, you have to be deliberate and intentional on creating that boundary between your work and your life. So productivity, I'm sorry, a couple recommendations on how to do that. It's very, very straightforward. You know, create that schedule and adhere to that schedule. And when you leave the office, you leave the office. When you're done for the day, you're done for the day. Doesn't mean you can't attend to urgent issues as needed, but really establish that boundary. Break those rules rarely. Take vacation, and when you do take vacation, unplug completely while you're on vacation. Okay, productivity strategy number 2 is basically just around being available and being present. So it's that remote employee that often gets this stigma that I've already referred to about they're not working a full day, they're not participating, they're not seen, they don't know what's going on, or you don't know what's going on with them. This out of sight, out of mind principle is almost overwhelming. And it creates that toxic environment that I was talking about. So I know that this is really potentially overlap, but I bring it up again intentionally. So when I talk about, you see the second bullet point there, which is to establish your presence each day through communication to boss and peers. So this is going back to the comment that was made just a minute ago from the individual that typed into the chat window about, you know, potentially becoming overwhelmed with all that communication that's coming in from their direct reports, and you almost have to get to the point where you're ignoring Slack. Yeah, I get that, and that's a whole separate conversation to have. But when I talk about establishing your presence each day through communication to the boss and peers, that's not like 15-minute conversations every day with your boss. That can be very, very quick. That can be, a quick text message conversation or a very quick phone call where all you've done is you've established in that peer's mind and in that boss's mind that you're there, that you're on, that you're present, that you're available. And then again, this is one of those things that really seems really just self-evident, and I probably shouldn't even have to bring it up. But in that environment, it is so critical that you respond promptly to phone calls and to emails and to chat messages. You can't be on all the time, but it is just so critical that you're communicative and quick to respond when your peers and when other people reach out to you. So again, not rocket science, but that isolation bubble just creates this environment where you can so dramatically and so quickly just hurt yourself, hurt your image, hurt your presence. All right, I've got a couple different comments that I want to make just around the last strategy, and this is around management strategy. And this also goes back to the comment that was made in the chat window a minute ago. I'm not going to assume that most of you on this call are managers, but the reason I bring it up is because these last 2 points are so important that if you do not see this functionality in your work team, that I strongly recommend that you bring this to your manager and ask your manager to implement something similar to what I'm going to present to you right now. And that first strategy is around encouraging team unity through those informal conversations. Now, I realize that those informal conversations can sometimes be a bit of a time suck. They can really eat into some of your work time. And I'm not suggesting that you just throw that door wide open, but research has shown that there is value in that casual, non-business conversation. It doesn't have to take up a huge portion of your day, but it is important in regards to creating a cohesive team. So some very simple comments, just, like when you start a team meeting, I'm assuming that most of you would have a team meeting once a week or some sort of touch point once a week. Don't just dive right into the actual work content. Spend a few minutes at the beginning of that meeting just talking about something like, you can see some suggestions that are on your screen. What's your favorite book? And just go around the table, just go around the team and have everybody indicate what's their favorite book of all time. If you could learn a new skill, what would it be? If you could have anyone over for dinner, who would it be? I mean, those are just some really simple suggestions out of probably 1,000 suggestions. But the point is, you need to find those times to have those light, informal conversations. And that's kind of a segue into the second management strategy that I want to bring to your attention. Now, I don't know that historically all of you would have had the opportunity to do this, but most business teams have an opportunity maybe once a year or maybe a couple times a year historically to get together and do something fun as a team. In all the years that I've worked with managing a team, we've had what we call morale events, or we'd have a summer picnic, or we'd have something where we could get together as a team. And of course, in this remote world, even if the pandemic is resolved completely, now what we're facing with is a situation where a lot of your peers and coworkers are working all over the place, and you don't have the opportunity to come together face to face like you used to. But the point here is also similar to the last point, that those opportunities to come together as a team are also very important. So some things that you can do is just get creative with the team meetings. You can have a video team meeting, or even just a video offsite. You can have a situation where you bring your pet. Everybody brings their pet to the team meeting, or bring your kids to a portion of the meeting, or invite a guest speaker, watch a TED Talk together, watch Netflix together. You can actually go to lunch together as a team where you're all having lunch, even though it's on video, and you're just sitting there having lunch and having these conversations. There are so many things that you can do to build that cohesiveness as a team. And again, the reason that I even brought up these last 2 team strategies was because even though you might not be a team manager, if you're not doing that, I highly recommend that you bring this to the attention of your manager and, tactfully push them, get them to include this on the day-to-day activities. So we're coming down the home stretch. We only have about 5 minutes left, and so I want to turn the corner just really quickly and share a couple additional thoughts. Now, if you attended the session that I gave a few weeks ago on think and act like a leader, this is kind of from that. What you're seeing on your screen is this list of attributes that are historical attributes that people with strong executive presence have. And just something that I wanted to call out is in this world where we're all working remotely, or so many of us are working remotely, some of the importance and emphasis on these attributes is changing. You can see really quickly on this screen that appearance and listening is becoming more important. Passion, reputation, pedigree, decisiveness, showing teeth is becoming less important. And there's a couple new items that are kind of hitting the list, which is around help, action-oriented, teamwork, collaboration, and leadership. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here again because we're kind of running out of time, but I will give you a quick example. So, these historical attributes around executive presence and leadership, about having this gravitas and having this real showing teeth and decisiveness and, having this real strong pedigree and being an industry leader, that is really just being replaced with the importance of being teamwork oriented and help action oriented. So the example is just honestly just about 2 months ago, we had a meeting, a company meeting where I work, where we just flipped over to the new calendar year. There were some new changes that were taking place with our benefits relative to health insurance and other benefits. And I had just finished my 1-year anniversary, and so I had some questions that I was asking that others that were on the call that had been at the company longer than I had, they already knew the answer to, and they really, I said, a couple questions, we can take them offline if we need to. We had finished that phone conversation, and less than a minute after we finished that meeting, I had one of my peers call me and said, Ben, I heard your questions on the call. They sent me a couple links in text messages to the documents that answered my questions. They answered my questions. They asked if I had any other questions. That is such a simple endeavor on their part. But if we're talking about impact and presence in the virtual world, and if we're talking about executive presence and thinking like a leader and acting like a leader, that is so much more powerful now than being decisive and having gravitas. It's something that I, again, challenge you to think about strongly. And then the last thing I just wanted to share with you before we wrap up is relative to building your brand in this virtual world. I had a video clip I was going to show. We don't have time to show it, but as you take to heart the direction that I gave you a few minutes ago, which was use your video, use your video, use your video. There are a lot of things that you can run into that will kind of blow up in your face, if you will, if you're not using your video correctly. Making sure that the camera is set up, making sure that your sound is set up, making sure that your Wi-Fi is set up correctly, that you don't have these distractions. Because honestly, this other 30-second story that I can tell you was going back a few years ago when I was working on a global team, and we had a meeting that was scheduled at 7:30 a.m. my time, just so other people around the world could attend. It just landed at 7:30 a.m. my time, which was the same time that I was always driving into the office. And I had a one-on-one with my boss a few months after that 7:30 a.m. meeting was set up, and they said to me, Ben, you've got to do something about the way you attend that meeting, because every time you show up to that meeting and talk, we can't understand you. All we can hear is background noise, and it's annoying, and it's frustrating, and it's very, very distracting. And the reason it was happening was because I was attending that meeting as I was driving to work, and I had a terrible Bluetooth headset, and so it really diminished my presence. And so be aware of that. As I do with most of the sessions that I conduct, end with this guarantee, and I'm going to do it again today, which is to say, I promise you that if you diligently pursue some of these strategies, implement these strategies, please resist the temptation just to say, I know that, be deliberate about it. I promise you that it will improve your impact and your presence. One last comment, I'm going to hand it back to our moderator, which is to say next week we have session number 5, which is based on storytelling to deliver powerful presentations. I'm very much looking forward to that session. I invite you all to attend. If you have questions that we didn't have time to get to today, look me up on LinkedIn. Happy to respond, happy to have the conversation with you. Thank you so much, and I'm going to turn the time back over to Hassam. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben, for today's session. It was great to see how we can create impact and presence in a virtual world now that most of our meetings and work and business is done online. Just a quick reminder here for everyone that, again, link the YouTube, sharing my screen now. All right, so yeah, just a quick reminder for everyone, we're recording this session. I'm gonna get it on YouTube shortly, and you can watch it on demand. Same story for the past sessions, you can always watch them on YouTube. Don't miss the future sessions and the series, as we have more exciting topics as well. You can connect us with us on Twitter, and also there is this newsletter that we're sending. We know that you're getting a lot of notifications from Meetup, and sometimes you might be missing some of the great content. So there is this Reactor newsletter. It's one place, sent once a month. It's a monthly curated newsletter, and you can select there and not miss, the sessions. You can select the different locations that you are interested in attending the sessions from. Now that we're doing these sessions online, you can be part of different communities globally as well and benefit from all the Reactor learning opportunities. So I highly encourage you to do that, and also spend a minute to do the Reactor survey. This is a channel for us to learn more from you about all the stuff that you would like to see at the Reactor, and then we can also include that in our future programming. Thank you so much for joining us again today, and hope to see you on the next one. Goodbye, everyone.